Tap into a whole new world of financial possibilities. Genie, get it to get it.
When the going gets tough, the tough gets going. Now in business, getting things going involves logistics and supply chain. I know we have dedicated many episodes to discuss this vital topic, but the vitality is such that there is nothing called talking too much about it. We have discussed multiple different facets of supply chain, from the shipping side to logistics. Today, we focus on a very vital aspect of supply chain security. How can you be so sure that your goods will reach the destination carefully and securely without tampering? What are the threats that are there? And so much more are there to be discussed. And joining me on this special discussion is none other than Abdul Kader, who is the global head of supply chain security and compliance of a leading freight forwarding company in Sri Lanka. Abdul, absolute pleasure to have you. Welcome to Bisnomics.
Pleasure to be with you, Tharindu.
Abdul, now we hear today about these global supply chain blocks. In fact, I read that from last year to this year, the cost of shipping goods from Asia to Europe has gone up by 10 times. That's like not even 10%, 10 times. Now that's massive. Tell us, with all these shipping prices being at an all-time high, what's the current status quo of supply chains? In other words, what's exactly going on?
Tharindu, it's actually a situation where there is an imbalance between the demand and supply. It started off with the COVID pandemic situation. We know that China is the factory of the world.
Yes.
And they keep producing for the rest of the world in large quantities.
Yes.
Right. With the pandemic situation, we saw China came out of it after a while, whilst the EU and the US countries, were affected. Then there was a need in the aftermath of the Chinese New Year. Shipping lines usually cut capacities because there's a lot of production taking place which goes out, and then China closes for about 10 to 12 days.
That's the Chinese New Year is also called the biggest movement of people, because millions of people, closing upon almost like 500 million or more, move between cities.
Exactly. So to keep things in balance, the shipping lines, cut capacities.
That's where the global supply chains cool off for a bit.
Exactly. So when these things happened in sequence, the US and Europeans started, purchasing more. But then where are the containers to, ship that across to the US or the Europe? That is where all these balance problems started between. There is a lot of demand now created because the US and the European countries injected a lot of money to keep the economies running. And then there were no containers to ship those goods out from China to, wherever. It became a problem where across different countries, the containers were stuck, right? Added to that, in March this year, we also had one of the biggest ships getting stuck at the Suez Canal.
Yes, they were given.
Exactly, right? So just imagine a situation, a ship gets stuck. For a day, you have about 50 ships, wanting to pass the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
And the amount of, revenue loss to the Suez Canal Authority. And then this is where the best part comes in. Most of the time, shippers don't, we see some shippers don't insure their goods. When this ship got stuck, the ship owners declared general average. So general average is where when the ship is in distress, to safeguard the ship, the cargo owners have to, contribute a portion of their revenue in order to salvage the ship. So imagine a situation where you hadn't insured your goods and you have to pay close to about $1 billion in claims.
Wow.
Right? Now that's one scenario. On top of that, with all these people unable to come to work, ports getting congested,
And when you say ports, Abdul, let me get this right. I don't know whether I'm right if I say this, but out of the 10 super ports in the world, 7 of them are in China. And even due to the Delta variant, we saw lots of these ports really closing. So, sounds like the perfect storm to me.
But it's not only in China. Yes, you have the largest ports in China, which has a lot of turnover. You know, from Singapore to the European ports to the US ports, every port was congested because of the bottlenecks. So now we have a situation where people are demanding, there is no supply, people cannot get the goods across because there's no containers. So that's why the prices went off the roof.
Understood. And what I've also read on many different foreign sources as well is that another factor that was auxiliary to this or complementing this problem or making the gravity of the storm even more stronger was the fact that a lot of companies, brands have actually cut down production, thinking due to the pandemic people will order less. Whereas when people were spending time at home, they were ordering more. And when the companies cut down capacity, so did some of the shipping lines. And now all of a sudden, when the trend didn't go in the way they expected, in fact took a out-about turn and went in the 180-degree, the different direction, the companies and the shipping lines were caught off guard. So as you correctly said, a lot of factors contributing to this storm. Now let's talk about your pet area, supply chain security. We always talk about the business side of supply chain, but we don't see enough being spoken about supply chain security aspect, Abdul. From a supply chain security, from a layman's perspective, for all of us to understand, what are the most common supply chain security threats we see? We hear about pirates, we hear about counterfeit goods. Enlighten us.
Okay. So, Tarindu, when you say supply chain security, a supply chain security expert's or a professional's job is to wear a security lens over the operational lens. So starting point is we have to have a very good understanding about operations, how supply chain management functions. On top of that, we wear the security lens to identify what are the risks, vulnerabilities, threats. And then we bring in the controls to mitigate, manage those risks and ensure that you provide a sound mechanism of security into the supply chain. That's basically, in layman terms, supply chain security. So if you ask about the threats that are there, I would like to say it's about supply chain disruptions in a broader concept, and you find cargo theft, then cargo terrorism, counterfeit products. These are the threats that we are talking about. Right? So security, cargo security, Tarindu, is not an isolated event. So when you look at security, you have to look at it from a holistic perspective and ensure that across the value chain, security controls are established in order for the supply chain to move smoothly. But what happens if not is, one of the objectives of a supply chain security professional is to ensure legitimate channels of trade are not used for illegitimate activities. So this is where
saying that if I am an exporter or importer, while I am exporting and importing my goods, and I am thinking, okay, look, you know what, it's only my goods that are going under my name, that there can be other various devious parties trying to smuggle various other illegal goods under my name?
Exactly. See, the thing is, in people, organized criminals, they will look at what's the best way to, get through certain controls. So they will use usually, I would like to ask you this question, Tarindu. If you were to meet someone who had asked for an appointment from you, who would you give priority to? A person who you know or the person who you don't know?
Someone whom I know.
Exactly.
Unsuspecting.
Unsuspecting. So the same mentality now the criminals have thought, okay, if I go with an unknown person, the controls will be more, I'll be screened more.
Yes.
So I might get caught. So I might as well try my luck with a person who is compliant, who has the controls in place, right? Because of a weak link, I'll manipulate that weak link in order to get into this supply chain.
And this weak link could be maybe a corrupted individual in my organization?
Yes. There are several different actors involved in supply chain. when you look at a supply chain from origin to the retail outlet, Tarindu, there are different actors and entities involved, right? It gets manufactured in a factory at origin, then it has to get transported, go to the port or the airport, right? In between that, the factory may not have its own warehouse to store the goods. It goes to a storing warehouse, then the transporter picks it up. In a Sri Lankan context, you find it transporter picks it up from the warehouse and takes it to the port or the airport, right? Then the airline takes over, then it goes to the hub port, or if it is a direct shipment, goes to the destination. Then the customs get involved. There are several actors. Then once it custom cleared,
more than several. I think there's a plethora of actors, entities,
actors.
people. But the more the people,
the more the risk, right? How do you know which hands are clean, right? Security, we say, it's supply chain is as strong as the weakest link.
Exactly.
Right. So my pet area is this. I got involved in supply chain security from 2006 onwards. For the last 15 years,
yes,
I've
1.5 decades.
Yeah, involved in this, studying this, and that's my job basically.
So, as you mentioned, you have the cargo theft. Your cargo can get stolen.
Correct.
And then, what is cargo terrorism? And we also hear about these pirates, the Somalian pirates, and pirates from some of these poor African countries. Not to really have a judgment versus those countries, but I think Somalian pirates is a very commonly heard name in supply chain security matters. What are those, Abdul? What are those elements?
Let me get into the first part of the question, Tarindu, about cargo terrorism, which is a very important role than the pirate issue. I'm not saying that the pirate issue is not, but it has been taken care of.
To a large extent.
To a large extent, right? What is, unaware is when your supply chain can be used for terrorist activities. I'll cite an example in, okay, first example I would like to table is the 9/11 attack.
Yes.
Right? When that happened, you have to close the borders, Tarindu. How do you know which plane will come and attack next? Which container or the ship carrying a container, which explosives will, blast off in your port? Now it's about trust. And business thrives on trust. But in security terminology, there is a saying, trust but verify. Right? So we as supply chain security experts, we want to trust but verify. So that is where supply chain security programs get involved, right? Where you can identify and capture information and control the supply chain before something happens. So coming back to the terrorism point of view.
How terrorists use.
Yeah. In 2010, I think in October 2010, one lady comes and hands over parcel, courier, which from the outer appearance of it, declares as a printer cartridge. It's the famous Yemen bomb incident, cargo bomb incident, right? It was destined to the US, but then through information received in Dubai and UK, there were two bombs, which one of them went in a cargo aircraft and one in a passenger aircraft, right? Now this took the people by surprise. What if it was detonated, right? So thankfully it was identified early, shipment was screened, and then it was very difficult, at the first inspection of it, people didn't know it was a bomb. It is a cartridge.
Yeah.
Right. So this is how the terrorist wants to infiltrate into supply chain. And we need to understand, Tarindu, what are the objectives of the terrorists? They want to attack economic hubs to cripple the economy.
Correct.
So imagine if that attack happens in an airport or a port.
The entire country's economic ecosystem collapses.
Entire thing collapses.
The airport or port is a critical part of the
supply
nerve of
chain.
The economy. It's a nerve system.
Exactly, and a very critical mode of the supply chain.
Absolutely. Abdul, now we speak about these traditional threats, but I also believe that cybersecurity is also a massive threat to supply chains. How do we see that evolving?
I would like to bring in an example here also, Tarindu. We may think, everyone knows, it's a known fact that there is a lot of phishing attacks taking place, ransomware attacks taking place. Cybersecurity has become a big concern, but that's a complete talk show that we could have on ISO 27000, how IT security comes involved to get secure your IT infrastructure.
Yeah.
But okay, one of the biggest, single largest shipping line in the world in 2017 June, succumbed to a cybersecurity attack.
All right.
Right.
This is worldwide or in US?
No, worldwide. I am talking about the single largest shipping line in the world.
Okay. Okay.
Right. They have 76 container terminals worldwide, and they control. They carry 15% of global trade in their ships. Now, in a situation like that, with that cyber attack, entire system collapsed. Now, that's a good eye opener to see. Okay, how resilient is our supply chain? Right? How quickly can we recover from a cyber attack like that? Then recently, this year, we had the GPS attack in one of the largest meat manufacturers in the world, JBS.
Even
Right?
Colonial Pipeline, the biggest one of the biggest pipelines
Exactly.
of US, entire West Coast lost access to oil for a few days and weeks.
Just imagine the economic impact. The previous instance which I mentioned, the economic impact, the loss was estimated at $300 million.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We are talking about the impact it could have, a terrorist attack or cyber attack could have on your supply chain.
And Abdul,
That's only the surface of the cost factor, right? As a result, how many operations get stranded? How
lost
many
business?
lost business? We are talking about just-in-time manufacturing. Can they now deliver just in time? All comes to a standstill. That loss is humongous.
Scary to think of it, and this is indeed a serious topic. And I'm glad that you are taking all these examples and sharing the actual picture with us, Abdul. Really appreciate that. We'll come back to you on more details. With regard to supply chain security, what are the compliance matters that you need to be looking into? Let's talk about that on the other side of this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Our focus today is on the supply chain security. What you need to know as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, or even a supply chain manager on securing your supply chain from a plethora of different threats which are out there, from physical to digital, and even now what we call phygital. And we are in conversation with Abdul Qadir. Abdul, now let's talk about this threat of lost cargo and especially counterfeit, because a lot of brands are actually worried. Look, we ship out something that may be genuine, but somebody might mix it with some of the fakes or the counterfeit items. And we see in some countries, as you go to the airport, they say, please note you are not allowed to bring in these various items from these countries. What is the exact economic impact of some of these supply chain threats, like counterfeit products being swapped with the genuine and original ones?
Okay, Tarinder, before I answer that question, I would like to highlight one point. Supply chain security experts have to have a good understanding of the operations of supply chain. So they need to have a good understanding of the Incoterms from Xworks to DDP, which the both extremes, where the risk and cost responsibilities get transferred from the seller to the buyer. One end is Xworks, one end is the DDP, destination duty paid. And UCP 600, letters of credit, universal custom practice for letters of credit. And all supply chain management operational activities have to be known to a supply chain security expert. Coming back to your question.
So the documentation is there in place to reduce the risk of these counterfeit actions.
Exactly. There is an element of that. That's why I brought that in my answer here.
Trust but verify. So use the documentation to verify.
Yes. But then that's only one side of the story. Documents only will be there. But what if there is a documentary fraud taking place? The
Buy
banks
a
do
weak
not
link.
look. The banks do not look at the cargo; they look at the documents when it comes to letters of credit, right? But then that's why I said you need to have a holistic picture, understand on what terms the buyer and seller has agreed. The selling terms, Incoterms, that comes into play there, in order to put the supply chain security controls in place, right? Then comes the question of counterfeit that you asked. What is the guarantee, Tarindu? The watch that we are wearing is an original.
The certificate which they give along with the product.
Yeah. So that is where brand protection gets involved. High-end brands value, there is a brand equity. There's a big amount placed on the brand value. So imagine if someone manipulates your supply chain, and instead of having the original sent, have the duplicates, or
And they can also always print a fake certificate and put just like the original.
Exactly. So that's where technology gets involved, where authentication, technology can be used to verify the authenticity of the product, whether this is the original product. Pfizer, everyone is aware
Talking
of
about
that,
it,
talking
yes.
about it, right? They're a pharmaceutical giant. One of the counterfeit threats are for pharmaceutical products. Then branded apparels, branded products.
And in some countries, Abdul, let's face it, there are some countries, for example, Vietnam, Thailand, you can go to, there are specific markets where you can go in and you can buy almost the same thing, almost the exact product with the same logo, everything, and it's only like $10-15.
Yeah, and you would find it very difficult to distinguish between the original and the duplicate.
Oh, absolutely. It's very tough to do that.
So there was an association which did an estimate way back in 2016, if I remember. The value of counterfeit products being sold was estimated at $460 billion.
Oh, massive economic impact.
Right. So the phone that we are using, how do we know it's original? That's where brand protection comes involved.
And the brands need to look into the supply chain security.
Exactly. Coupled with these technological, elements that they could use for users to verify maybe online, whether after purchasing, they will have a secure code, which they could, log in online and verify whether this is the original product or not. So those elements have to be incorporated into your brand as part of your brand protection elements to secure your supply chain from counterfeit products.
Abdul, let's talk about compliance. What are the most common security compliance standards which local supply chains, like the Sri Lankan supply chains, maybe exporters, importers, that they need to comply with? And once again, it might be a very simple and open question, but I would like to hear it from you. How important is compliance today in global supply chains?
I think it's one of the most important things, Tarindu, because I initially said trust but verify. You are compliant. We need to trust that you're compliant, but we need to verify that you're compliant as well. Right? Just to list out a few, international organizations, government entities, private industries have got involved in, creating supply chain security standards. Starting off, I would like to mention ISO 28000 is the standard for supply chain security, developed in 2007. Then you have Business Alliance for Secure Commerce, the industry body which has got involved. You have TAPA, Transported Asset Protection Association, another industry body which has developed a mechanism to safeguard. Initially, it started off to safeguard high value products, but that has become a benchmark in your supply chain security standards. World Customs Organization developed a standard called the Safe Framework of Standards. Right, Safe Framework of Standards in 2005, and they have kept on evolving these standards in line with the current threats and the vulnerabilities that are prevalent in the supply chains. So these are standards, and I would like to mention the starting point where all of these things got highlighted was the 9/11 attacks. US government thought, how can they protect their borders? How can they ensure that their supply chains are secure? That's when they introduced the CTPAT program, which is Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program. You asked me how it is important for the local
businesses, maybe exporters.
You know, if you are to ship your goods to the US, you have to comply with CTPAT.
Okay.
That is Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. So CTPAT actually set the benchmark for supply chain security programs. It was like the initial standards based on which even the ISO has done their 28,000 was developed based on CTPAT, right? So CTPAT focuses on three focus areas: the corporate security, the transportational security, the people and the physical security. Within corporate security, they look at the security vision and the responsibility, how well you do your risk assessments, your business partner security, how well you know your businesses, who are you doing business with, right? And then cybersecurity comes under corporate security framework.
True.
Then the transportational security, we look at the conveyance and IITs. IITs is instruments of international traffic. That is, in layman's terms, the containers or the ULDs, unit load devices. Unit load devices are the containers that we use in air freight.
All right.
Right? Then the seal security, right? Now, many people will have a false perception to say, okay, I have sealed my truck, so it's going to be secure. That may not be the case.
Is it that easy to break a lock these days?
It can be manipulated.
Wow. Right. So nothing is really safe, hence trust but verify.
Trust but verify. Procedural security. The entire supply chain, what are the procedures taking place has to be verified. Controls has to be in place. Then agricultural security was introduced recently. That I'll come to that, after I mention about the people and physical security elements. Then the physical security, physical access controls to your premises, wherever you're manufacturing products across the value chain. Then the personnel security, people who are involved, how are you vetting them? How well do you know your people, right? Then education, training, and threat awareness across this. There was a study done by the Australian Institute of Criminology, and they found out 80% of the cargo theft are insiders theft. So theft can take place with a combination of either it can be an insider theft, the people inside involved,
yes,
people from outside, or a combination of all these two.
Normally, with regard to especially cyber threats, we see that it's most of the time, 70% of the time, it's an insider job. Do you see a similar pattern in supply chain as well?
Exactly, right? Because they are the ones who know the operation. So this is where a supply chain, exactly. But your procedures, your supply chain management must integrate security. It has to go hand in glove, right? If you only manage supply chain and think I'm getting the best quote, I'm getting the best freight rate, I'm getting the best trucking company to do this for me, and you have overlooked security, you are in a big dilemma.
End of the day, you can't rely on anybody to do it. It's your baby, it's your responsibility.
Exactly, right? So this CTPAT under these three focus areas is a very good model that you can use to safeguard your supply chain.
All right. Do you think enough Sri Lankan exporters know about this, or do they end up falling into various problems, various pitfalls due to not knowing enough about it?
Well, if you are exporting to the US in particular, your importer will actually communicate the requirements and standards across to you.
Okay.
And there will be validations done by the US Customs, who will fly down to Sri Lanka and ensure that all these compliance standards are being met.
Okay, understood.
Right.
Abdul, what about the impact on a nation's economy? I mean, how important is supply chain security for a nation's economy? And especially in this regard, what role does the Sri Lankan Customs Department have to play?
Tarindu, most of the time, the customs is looked at as the revenue collector. But I would like to say that they are the first point of contact, the guardians of the borders.
Guardians of the borders. It's a nice way to position it,
Right.
Abdul.
Because it is them who have to ensure that the whatever coming inside the country and going out of the country is controlled. So that is why in 2005, as I said, the World Customs Organization developed the Safe Framework of Standards. It's built on 3 pillars, where customs to customs interaction is there, customs to business interaction is there, and then customs to other government agencies. On these 3 pillars, they have 5 elements. Advanced cargo manifest information. Before a shipment comes or goes out, the customs share that information with the receiving party. Right? Then they must have a understanding of a common risk management methodology. And on the request of the receiving country, they will have to do verification, an unintrusive inspection basically, using gamma ray scanners to scan the goods before it leaves the borders. So basically the customs have extended their borders to the point of origin, until not waiting till the threat comes to their borders.
Understood. So it's a lot of work, and they have to drive that culture of security into the organizations as well. We'll come back to you on more details of that, Abdul, after the break. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics.
Tap into a whole new world of financial possibilities. Genie, get it to get it.
Welcome back to Bisnomics, where we are in conversation today with Abdul Kader regarding the supply chain security. How can we make sure that our supply chains are secure and compliant with global standards? Abdul, I know we touched upon terrorism earlier, at the impact it can have on supply chains, but let's look at from a preventive perspective. If I'm an exporter, or if I'm an importer, or for that matter, I am a supply chain manager, what are the specific terrorism-related threats I should look out for my supply chain? And most importantly, what can I do to prevent it or minimize the threat and the risk?
I would like to start off with this quote from Thomas Jefferson, the US president. Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. Right. So that's, as I said, trust but verify. You have to ensure your controls are in place.
And you're not dropping the ball.
And you are not dropping the ball. Because your supply chain is as strong as the weakest link. So who knows whether you are the weakest link? So irrespective of whether it's a threat of theft or terrorism, criminals are looking at this weak point, weak link in the supply chains. So we must ensure that our supply chain is not the weak link. Let me give an example. US, one of the largest discount stores, had a cyber attack. I think 110 million customers' information was leaked out. 40 million credit card details information was leaked out. That didn't happen because it was the weak link was not the department store. It was one of their vendors. Their IT security was not up to mark,
Yes.
which became a vulnerable point, and it impacted the retailer.
I believe we specifically call these supply chain attacks, where you attack the weak point in the supply chain and through that.
Through that.
Yes.
Right.
So do terrorists also follow the same protocol?
Exactly. They will use any protocol in order to attack something. Right. So we have to be aware of the vulnerabilities. For that, you must have done a risk assessment on your supply chain.
Like a supply chain security audit.
Basically.
So what would be the checklist in a supply chain security audit, especially to prevent terrorism-related supply chain attacks?
It has to be looked at holistically, Tarindu.
Yes.
As I mentioned, I would like to bring in the best example of CTPAT,
Yes.
where they look at under 3 focus areas: corporate security, then the transportation security, and the people and physical security.
And I believe this
12
framework
elements that I
is
said.
available freely.
It's
for
available
people to check.
freely if you go to the US Customs Organization website. It's available.
Understood.
It's a good thing that businesses adapt a supply chain security program, even if it is not imposed on you. because finally it's your brand.
Yes.
And if something happens,
Yes.
you are in trouble.
And even if the word comes out that terrorists have been using a particular brand supply chain for their activities, that's not going to have a good impact on the brand equity either.
Exactly.
All right. Abdul, let's talk about another global problem. It might not be called a global pandemic, but I believe it's an equally harmful problem, which is narcotics. Now, we've heard about narcotics being shifted around in various forms. I'm no supply chain expert, but I do try to keep a good idea about what's happening in the world. And a few years ago, I read that at the US border, they found that a lorry coming in from Mexico. Inside potatoes, they had stuffed narcotics inside the potatoes. So I believe narcotics is also, people are, and let's admit, the suppliers, the dealers, the big players of the narcotics mafia is successfully finding ways to get narcotics moving with the legitimate supply chains. Otherwise, I don't think that we would be having narcotics available so freely. And let's admit, it's a problem in Sri Lanka as well.
Exactly.
Abdul, what can we do to prevent and avoid narcotics entering into our supply chain, or in other words, our supply chains being used for the transport and the distribution of narcotics?
Once again, boils down to your security controls across the value chain. You cannot isolate and look at security in silos, because once you look at that way, the terrorists will look at, or criminals will look at it. Where's the weak link, as I said before.
Yes.
Right. We find the drug smugglers trying various ways to
have you
smuggle.
seen this happening in Sri Lanka as well?
Yeah, we have enough incidents happening in Sri Lanka.
Care to explain one or two?
I would like to bring in example about the US scenario.
Sure.
Why I'm bringing that is how it can impact other supply chains. Although we may think, okay, that was not my particular container which had it.
But it can happen anywhere.
It can happen anywhere. And if there is a nexus to your supply chain, then you are also going to face the tune.
Absolutely.
Right. So in I think 2019, the biggest
in the recent past,
the biggest drug bust in US history was done. $1.1 billion worth of cocaine in one of the largest shipping lines in a vessel of one of the largest shipping lines in the world was caught in Port of Philadelphia. Now imagine you had a container in that vessel. Your container is going to go nowhere until that vessel gets cleared of the mess that it is in. Now the brand impact on that shipping line, right?
And how did they have this cocaine? Was it disguised in some form or just inserted?
The best part is, once again, insider player. One of the ship's crew was the one who facilitated that shipment. So
that shipment on paper was belonging to one particular company and was supposed to be something else.
Something else.
Oh wow.
Right. And see, we need to evolve in supply chain security to understand it's a cat and mouse game. We have to be better off than the criminal adversaries.
And let me get this also right when check with you. The good guys have to be right all the time. The criminals only have to be right or succeed once.
Exactly. Right. So just to bring in an example of fentanyl is a drug which you need a 2 milligram dose is lethal to certain people.
Okay.
Right. So 1 milligram is the dosage. So if you have 1 kilogram of fentanyl coming in, that's 1 million doses. Right. And if 2 milligrams is going to be lethal, it can cause death. So how now comes the customs role, in ensuring that these drugs do not come into the country. That is why WECO framework standards, safe framework of standards, come in handy. Authorized economic operator program comes in handy to support and help customs, to equip themselves to grasp this information and focus on high risk shipments, because we have millions of containers coming in, but how many custom officers are there in the port to inspect that? So it's about risk assessment and identify high-risk shipments, which will be then screened. Coming back to using, usually we use canine dogs to sniff. So imagine they sniff 2 milligrams of fentanyl.
Yeah.
They also could die.
Okay.
So we are putting one of our resources in front, and we will end up not having that in anymore.
Yes.
So we need to evolve, as I said, how we are going to work around this. And so what they did was they trained the dogs. So when they understand that there is narcotics in a shipment, they'll sit instead of sniffing and biting into the package.
All right. Interesting.
So that's how we also have to evolve to get a grasp of this and ensure that our supply chains are secure.
Very interesting. And quite cute creatures too, to be very honest. Abdul, let's talk about the extent of technology. To what extent can we use technology to combat these supply chain security risks? And let's also touch upon some of the modern developments of supply chain, such as, for example, blockchain. Enlighten us.
So actually the logistics industry have looked at blockchain because it's about, once again, in any business you need trust, and blockchain has been able to establish that trust.
Making it further difficult to hack and crack.
Exactly. There is transparency, there is traceability,
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, Abdul, but we also see that unlike earlier where multiple documents had to get downloaded, printed, signed, scanned, attached, send again, download, print, sign, scan. Instead of all of this, now we see, maybe the port of Mombasa, the exporter, importer, port of Sri Lanka, they can all log into a blockchain, sign up, and deal done in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, so that's where, once again, the single window, framework comes for the customs organizations to talk to each other and, share information. Coming back to blockchain, the logistics industry has gone into that in 2017. It's relatively a new technology. So there are certain things that has to be experimented in order to, before people embrace the technology. So blockchain in Transport Alliance was formed in 2017. Then they have been doing some work since of late to check how they can bring in blockchain to support the logistics industry.
Understood.
We have other means, technological tools which can be used to secure your supply chains, right? AMS, Automated Manifest System, Advanced Manifesting Systems, where you share information about the entire shipment with other party who needs to know before it comes to your borders.
Okay.
Right. Importer security filing introduced by US Customs. Once again, a technology that they a tool that they're using the technology to understand who the shipper is, who the consignee is, who is the party taking delivery of the shipment, what's in the shipment, the weight of it, what's the container number, what's the seal number used for that particular shipment. Everything is known before it can even get on board a container which is bound to the US.
Okay. And
then
what
we
about
have
something up to Sri Lanka? Don't they have the same way of finding it out?
That is what I think the Sri Lankan Customs Organization is working on implementing authorized economic operator here.
Would have been good to know what was coming on board Express Pearl, isn't it?
Exactly. So, see, you can use that. There are gamma ray scanners installed in certain ports where they use non-intrusive inspection technology to screen what is inside without having to open the container and look for what is inside. Then you have the GPS, the GSMs technology, RFID technology, high security seals, smart boxes. These are all technologies available for the supply chain industry or the logistics industry for them to use in order to secure their supply chains.
Abdul Qadir, thank you very much for joining us today. It was quite insightful to hear from you the world of supply chain security, what really needs to be done to secure all these business activities, especially related to import, export. Like you said, many different players, many different points of contact, so many chances or points where things can go wrong. Hence, the necessity to continuously trust but verify. Thank you so much for joining us and wishing you good luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you, Taridu. Appreciate it.
Today, our focus was on what we need to do to ensure that our supply chains keep moving ahead but with the right level of security and safety. Our guest Abdul Qadir shared with us and took us on a journey to the inside of supply chain security. What's really going on? What can go wrong? And most importantly, what we need to do to keep our supply chain safe. I'm Tharandu Amrasekara, and I wish you the week ahead to be a profitable one.
Tap into a whole new world of financial possibilities. Genie, get it to get it.